Hello, folks. How y'all doing? I think we're about ready to get started here, and everyone's good to go. Let me share my screen. Okay.
Hey Ryan, can you do a review on curl in the terminal, please? I was having some trouble with that last night.
Yeah, sure. Do you have any questions in particular? Or you just want me to kind of talk through the process of writing?
No, if you could just kind of talk through it. I don't know. I feel like I keep on getting like errors back when I try to run it. So I got past exercise 1. I'm having trouble with exercise 2.
Yeah. So in general with curl, the way you write out a curl command is you start with the word curl, and then you have a number of sort of what are called flags. A flag has a sort of a label in front of it with dash something and then a value. So generally, the sort of way you want to type it out is you want to start with curl, and then enter every flag need to add in order to make the request you'd like to make. So by that I mean, let's say you want to make a post request with a custom header and a body, then you need to include all 3 of these. If you only want to make, maybe you just want a get request with no custom headers and no body, then you could just do curl this, and you can leave this out because it's defaults to get.
So then each time you would still have like the -x that would be for like the command that you want to do, like post or get or whatever. And then you need the -h and then whatever. So you would do the -h and then that would be like your headers and then the value in there. So those would still be in the I don't know, what are they? They're not quotations, they're ticks or whatever. Those things. Yeah, single quotes. So those would be inside the single quotes. And then you would need the D and then that would be like the body. I'm sorry, no. Well, oh, okay, the D would be the body.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just having trouble. Maybe I'm just having like syntax errors because that's what I was doing. So I will continue to try and work on that.
What I saw in a couple of the assignments from yesterday is a bunch of people had their terminal in sort of a weird state, and then were typing roughly the right thing, and then we're getting errors, not necessarily because the command they were typing was wrong, but because they were typing it in the wrong context. So maybe they typed like nc module5.ml and then a port and then hit enter and then type the curl. Curl is a
So it would all be ran in one line, correct?
Say that one more time.
So like the whole curl request would all be ran in one line. Like you wouldn't click enter after posting the header and stuff. Like you would just continue typing.
Exactly. Yeah, you enter this all in one line, hit enter at the very end.
Okay. That's probably also another issue that I was having, because I was clicking enter after some of them. And then I noticed like if you clicked enter too many times that it would log you out, and then you'd have to do like nc module 5.ml again. So
yeah, well, so I want to be clear here that the nc module 5.ml thing I was saying, that's not what you want to do for curl.
Oh, you don't want to do that for curl.
Don't want to do that. So
okay, that could also be another issue. So let me ask you a question, because you didn't want to do the nc module curl. Hold on, let me pull up the exercise first. So you don't want to do the nc module 5 for curl, so you would still just do like curl -h or whatever it is. I could read it when I do it. So basically it's the same thing, that you just don't need to do the call to action of the module.
Yes, and the reason why that is if I connect to here and I type my curl statement, what it's going to do is it's going to send the literal text of this curl statement
what I was getting
on the socket. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to run curl at your shell. You want to do something like curl something like this, not inside of the netcat context. This is
Okay.
the command just like netcat is a command.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense to me. Thank you. I think that's why I was having so many errors, just because I was like doing so many steps like together in a way, because I was combining the NC module 5.ml, and then I was also running curl. So that could be also why I was getting the errors and stuff on number 2.
Yeah, I will say I did see some examples in the assignments where people were doing that. I don't remember who. I was kind of just grading and wasn't really paying attention to names, but I know.
Yeah, I took the screenshots from like Postman, but I didn't upload anything because I wanted to get like the curl screenshots together first and then upload them together. So I do have the screenshots from Postman and everything, and I'll just work on 2 through 4 for the curl exercises as well.
Cool.
To
Does anybody else have any questions about what we talked about yesterday before we?
yeah, Carolyn, as you know, and you've seen in the chat, questions 3 and 4, I'm still having trouble with. So examples 3 and 4, I should say, in the curl.
Yeah.
I did post screenshots not long ago in Slack.
Let me pull that back up again.
In the pasted code channel. See what I'm doing wrong. Yeah, you know, some of this stuff I wasn't really clear, like when you had the single quotes around the header information and the body. I thought that was just like on the slides to show this is what will go there, not that what you put there has to be in the single quotes. I didn't catch that the first time.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing to know, so that
it is
helpful. And I got 1 and 2 done, so that's a start. But like for 3, I'm getting quote with the caret command line marker prompt.
That's what I also was getting last night as well. I spoke to Corey and she said to just do Control-C to escape it and then rerun the command, and that actually did work for me.
Where it said like quote and then a greater than sign, they're saying?
Yeah. It's the prompt like you get in Node. And I have been Control-C seeing out, if that's a word, with each exercise, so I could do a screenshot without anything else on that, terminal page and clearing the terminal. So I don't know if we're supposed to get quote or I did something wrong.
So the reason why you get that is, let me get a shell similar to what you've got. So in general, and when you're typing things in the shell, just like in JavaScript, you put quotes around strings. It's in general like what you do. And just like JavaScript, you need to put a beginning quote and an end quote around a string. And if you only put one in, the shell's not really going to know what to do. It's going to get kind of confused. So in the case of that quote, what you were doing is you were putting one quote and then hitting enter. And it's kind of weird in the way it says
I
it.
wasn't putting any quotes in. And then I realized I was supposed to, but I'm not hitting enter. I'm just typing the whole line and letting it wrap down as it should. And after the URL's typed in with the path, I'm hitting enter.
Yeah, I mean, if you're seeing this quote thing, what that means is you've got an unmatched number of single quotes or double quotes in your string. So you've got an odd number, one maybe at the very beginning and not one at the end of something.
Oh, okay. And I did do some copying and pasting to save my hands with typing a bit because I'm having some trouble. So when I did that, just like the other day when I had 2 slashes before the path, it's because I had copied and pasted. So I'll go back and take a look at that and see if that changes anything. So, and then on 4, you can see in Slack what I ran into.
Just real quick, I want to show what I'm talking about. So like if I get rid of one of these quotes here and hit enter, that's where you get that.
Oh, that's what's telling me. So it's actually doing me a favor by telling me.
What it thinks you're doing is it because it doesn't see a quote here and it's reading this, it thinks that this whole thing is the string that should be passed to -d because you haven't typed a quote yet.
Yep. And it's even more confusing because it thinks that's a string, but you haven't told it the end of the string has come. So it's like, what are you supposed to do with that, computer, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
I'm sending it into a like mental something. Okay. I'll break it one of these days, I'm sure.
For your example 4 you put, that actually looks about right. Remember, the endpoint for 4 is a little bit messed up. I didn't end up fixing it. So I think the 4 you posted in that channel looks good.
Oh, but it didn't look like it worked.
It said you got a 200.
The 4 that I just posted?
The one you posted at 4:50 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like it worked.
Really?
I think so.
My confidence is not instilling confidence, is it? Really? Let's see here.
Well, unless anyone has any large questions still with the curl, and I want to go through that through that further, then I might start here on today's stuff. Oh, there's some stuff in the chat. Let me see here.
Oh. Production host left and
So Latonia asked me, if possible, please clarify if there are scenarios where the input can be technically incorrect, but the proper output will still be produced. I would argue that if you're entering input and it gives you the proper output, then your input is correct, even if it's not exactly what I told you to do. I guess maybe I don't fully understand that question, but I think maybe that makes sense.
No, it does. I just I wondered if I had like snuck in a couple things that weren't really in where they should have been, and it still gave the right output. And I just wasn't sure if it's really finicky or not, which is kind of what you've been saying from the beginning, like it's really particular about where things go. But I just wanted to ask just to clarify.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I also want to mention to everybody that like I really talked about curl, not because it's something you're necessarily going to use every day, like composing curls from scratch, like writing them on your own. It's more just I want you to know that they exist. So if you're having problems with them, like that's totally fine. Really, the big takeaway you should be getting from curl is that it is a format that can be used to express requests. And you might receive one in the future. And you should know that when someone sends you a curl, they're sending you the means to make an HTTP request. And you can import that into whatever tool you want. But just like what that is used for is really the important part. So I think I'm gonna jump into section. Oh,
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, it's about Postman. So we downloaded the desktop version or the downloaded version. Also, there is an option when you go to Postman, it says launch Postman, where you run it without downloading the web version. What's the difference between the two? I mean, the reason I am asking is my internet was really terribly bad. It took me almost 10 minutes to download it.
Huh. I'll be honest, I didn't even know there was a web version. I would guess that it's probably pretty similar to the desktop version. Yeah, I don't know if I can really comment because I'm not really familiar with the web version.
No worries, thanks.
Cool. So yesterday we talked about curl and Postman, making requests with those tools. It seems like in general people had a lot of success with Postman, and people had some mixed success with curl. I took a look at a lot of the assignments from last night, and a lot of people really got it. A lot of people had a little more of a challenge with it, but I would say it didn't seem like anyone like really didn't get it. Like it seemed like everyone was relatively close if they didn't have it. So I think that's good. But today we're going to be talking about tools you can use in the browser to make requests, make HTTP requests. So keep in mind the tools we've talked about so far have been using the command line and been using a graphical user interface app on your computer. But kind of the more useful thing with requests is being able to make them from the context of a web page. Because imagine like a Google Slides, this application here. You go to this web page, it returns a bunch of HTML, returns a bunch of CSS. That's nice and all. It looks good. But somehow Google Slides has to get the content of like this presentation and has to somehow get it into the web page so it can show that to the user. And this content for the presentation is stored on a web server somewhere. It's stored on some computer, often a data center on some hard drive. And this web application here has to talk to that server remotely and has to ask it for the slides to show onto the page. It somehow has to take those slides, figure out a way of representing them in text, and then the web page probably makes a request to the server saying, give me the slides for the link that was loaded. And the server says, here are the slides. And then the front end app renders those slides to the screen. So it's web requests, I would say, are almost more critical in the browser than they are outside of the browser, because that's really the only means in a browser you have to talk to external services and to get data. So today we're going to talk about how you would go about doing that. And this is kind of really, all the days we've been doing up to now have kind of been leading up to today. Today is kind of the last really big conceptual day where we're going to be talking about like foundational things. And the rest of the class, pretty much from this point on, is going to be sort of details related to this, but like this is the last big conceptual day. So there are a couple different JavaScript HTTP libraries you can use that are kind of popular these days, and ones you should know that exist. The first one is called fetch. And just like set timeout or promise like from yesterday or any of these sorts of JavaScript functionalities, fetch is built into modern browsers. So if I open up DevTools and I type fetch, and see fetch is a function that's built into the browser. I don't get an error when I look at this. And I can run fetch and I can make requests using it. It's built into the browser. I don't need to include a library. It's good to go. It's pretty good. And I'll say for maybe 85% of the requests I've made in the past 2 years have been with fetch in a browser. It's really kind of becoming the standard way that people do it. So another library that I'm going to be bringing up is called Axios. And Axios is very similar to fetch, only it's a little bit more advanced. Now, Axios is a library. So just like Bootstrap, you have to bring it into your code. It's not something built into the browser. And in fact, Axios is sort of like a slightly higher level wrapper on top of fetch. And well, what kind of things does it do? Oh, didn't mean to do that. What kind of things does Axios provide, you might ask? Well, Axios, kind of its big advantage is it allows you to configure a bunch of information about requests you're going to make once, and then later on, just be able to pass like a smaller amount of data later on. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say maybe you're making a bunch of requests all to a server located at module5.ml. You could configure globally. You could say module5.ml is the server I'm going to be talking to. And then from then on, you could just say, I want to make a request to this path. I want to make a request to that path. I want to make a post request to this path. You could you could say all those on their own. And because you're configuring that information globally for Axios, like the module5.ml, it kind of is able to combine those together, and it sort of makes the work you're doing a little bit easier. And then the final one, I don't know if you folks have talked about Jquery at all in this class. If this class was like 5 years ago, you would have definitely talked about Jquery, but these days it's kind of more of a legacy thing. But Jquery is, if you haven't talked about it, is a library, kind of one of the original JavaScript libraries used in browsers to make interacting with the browser easier. So it makes it really easy to create new elements on a page, or it makes it really easy to add like click event handlers to things. And the reason why maybe you haven't seen it so far, or you haven't used it extensively so far, is because over the years, Jquery, the features from Jquery have slowly made their way into the browser. And it's gotten to the point where pretty much all the really compelling things about Jquery are now built into the browser. And there's not really much of a reason, if you're working on like a modern browser, to really need Jquery anymore, which is really cool. Like, it's neat to see that features from libraries that are really popular can make their way into the browser like that. And there is a method on the method in Jquery called .ajax you can use to make HTTP requests in the browser. I bring it up just because you're probably going to see things like jQuery.ajax or $.Ajax thrown around. And really what I want you to know is that just means they're making an HTTP request from within the browser. But it's not really something I've used in a very long time. And it's not really something that these days, the cutting edge of the industry is focused on anymore. So it's not something we're going to talk about in this class, but I just want to make you aware that it exists. So in this class, we are going to be talking about Axios. And really the reason we're going to be talking about it is because Joey's going to be using it in the next module. And I wanted to talk about something that's going to be applicable right away in the next module. Honestly, Axios and Fetch are pretty similar. So if you learn Axios and you have to use Fetch, you're going to be pretty, it's going to be pretty easy for you to figure that out. And really, that goes for all these different libraries. They're all very similar. At the end of the day, like, there's only so many different pieces of information you have to provide when you make a request. I mean, you've seen them over and over again now, and it's just slightly different ways of passing that information into the library. And Latonia, query selector, that isn't jQuery, that's built into the browser, but query selector is actually one of the big things that they stole from jQuery. So you might have seen like let's see. You might have seen like the $, like this sort of thing before, like $, parentheses, like the $sign function. This is jQuery. And you'll encounter it, but not really the cutting edge anymore. So Axios. Axios is a JavaScript library, I already said that. And it's a library that accepts parameters describing an HTTP request. And it asynchronously makes that request and then provides an object representing the response. So we're seeing that asynchronous word again, which should make the alarm bells go off. We should think from yesterday, promises, callbacks. So Axios, what it's going to return is not going to be directly a response. It's going to be information that will eventually turn into a response. It's asynchronous. So here's kind of what Axios looks like in practice when you use it. So there's a function for making a post request, axios.post, and you give it 3 parameters. You give it the method, but you give it a URL you want to make a request to. You give it the body you'd like to include in the request, and then a bunch of other options if you want to include extra metadata along with the request. So the first parameter is the URL, and that should be pretty familiar to you at this point. Same sort of thing you'd put in Postman or you'd put in curl. So it has a protocol, it has a domain, and it has a path, and query parameters if you want, but that sort of same exact format. Second parameter, which is optional and really only used for things that aren't GET requests. So in this case, I've got a post here, is the body. And the body is a string, just like the URL. And it's just whatever information you'd like to include in the body of the request. And then finally, there are this final parameter here that allows you to specify options. And the reason why Axios does it this way, you might think like, well, headers, isn't that something I'm going to include all the time? And yeah, it is, but it's a lot more common, or maybe rather, it's a lot less common to include headers in a request, special headers in a request, than it is like a special body for a post request. And because of that reason, a lot of these sort of extra parameters you can specify in the request are put in this final object here, and they're optional. So if you don't specify them, then it's just going to kind of use some default values. And in the case of the headers, the default value is just like an empty object, an empty set of headers. And I should mention, headers are specified as an object. So you've got this big object here. You've got a headers key, and that maps to an inner object inside, where the key of that inner object is whatever header key you want, and then whatever header value you want. So it's this is a kind of a nice way to represent it, because in JavaScript we have object, which is kind of a very nice key value representation a means of representing things in that way. So it's the kind of a data type that works really well for storing headers or anything that really maps from key to value. So that's sort of why they've picked doing it this way. Note that this isn't a string, this is an object. So like if you were to try to do something like this, that wouldn't work. You've got to make it an object, and that's really important.
Excuse me, Ryan. This is Latonia. So when we're writing that, do we keep those double quotes? Or would it be, are you just showing like this is what you would put there?
Yeah, good question. So in this case, yeah, you want to keep all the double quotes here. Technically, you don't have to quote your keys in JavaScript. I tend to quote them when they are not lowercase, just due to style. But like, yeah, all the quotes here, they need to be here. Like this is a string, this is a string, this is a string, and this is a string. So very important, yeah. So I think this next slide is going to probably help a little bit. This is basically the post call here, and then what all the different parts in the actual raw HTTP request color-coded so you can map them back and forth. So you can see, for example, like the method here corresponds to the method here. The port here is that port, that's the default port, and it knows that because it's an HTTP request. The path matches here, body, and then headers. So I talked about how a lot of these have default values. And the body defaults to just an empty string. String. And then the options defaults to just empty headers. And the only real option we're going to be using today is headers. There are a lot more of them. And I suspect when you start going into this further with Joey, he's going to talk about some more of them. But headers is the only one we're going to be talking about today. And actually for the rest of the class. So that's all nice and good. And you can make a request with Axios. But how do you get the response? And that's where the return value of this function comes in. So remember, we've got our function here, and the functions can return something. And remember from would you do this in the JavaScript file or the terminal? The JavaScript file. That's a really good clarification. So this is all something you're going to be doing in JavaScript in a web page. And this, the reason why you can't use something like curl or Postman in a web page is because those are set up to work in specific environments. So Postman, for example, is set up to work like on a desktop in a graphical user interface you can click around. Curl is set up to be used in the terminal. And the reason why all these different tools exist is because they're really aimed towards specific use cases. And Axios and Fetch and all these other libraries, they're aimed towards being used in the web, on a web page. Really good question. Sorry, there we go. So Axios, because this is JavaScript, that it's going to return a value. And this value it's going to return is a promise. So getting back into promises here. Why is it going to return a promise? Well, remember, Axios is an async operation. And we talked about promises yesterday, but promises really we could spend a couple days just focused on them easily. I kind of went through them kind of quickly yesterday. I actually have some content in this presentation I was planning on going through with them today, but kind of ended up covering that yesterday. They're going to probably keep coming up and you're going to keep having questions about them. And the best thing you can do is just keep asking those questions. And eventually, slowly but surely, you'll start to wrap your head around them. It takes everyone a while to really get them. This is sort of what Axios looks like in practice. So imagine you've got a script tag on a web page. And you put this sort of thing in the script tag. So you do axios.get, and you maybe get module5.ml. And then you store the return value from this function into promise. Then you can then call the .then method on promise and give it that callback. And then once the request is completed, it'll call this callback. It's an asynchronous operation, remember. And then this response value here will contain all the information about the response returned back from module 5.ml. So in this case, response.status is equal to the status code. So if you're lucky, this would print out 200. And actually, let's give this a try here. So I'm going to go to module 5.ml. Now, I didn't mention this, but I'm going to mention it now. Module 5.ml has a web page you can go to in the browser, and it shows you this sort of screen. But something else is that module 5.ml loads Axios for you. It has the script tag in here. So because of that, you can go into the JavaScript console on module 5.ml, and Axios is defined for you. And I did that just kind of to be nice, because I figured this would be a good place where you could possibly try things out if you wanted to. That makes it a little bigger. So Axios is defined. Now I'm going to paste this here. And I'm going to hit enter. And 200. How about that? Pretty cool. Now, just to reinforce what was being said before, if I were to put this in the terminal, it's totally not going to work at all. Like, it's just going to totally blow up. So this is not something you can do in the terminal, something you do in the web browser. Does this sort of roughly make sense to folks? We're going to do some examples here soon.
Ryan, I have another question. This is Latonia. We were told not to use var. I'm just wondering if you just wanted to keep it really simple, or did you maybe explain this already and I just missed it? Somebody already asked. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm curious, who told you not to use var?
Well, we were told that it's been like retired, I guess, and we use const and let, right? Or what we told just not to use it for those specific platform languages.
Yeah, I mean, whoever told you that is right. It has been retired. The reason why I'm using it is more because typically when I end up teaching JavaScript, I use var because it's less confusing for students. But given that you're familiar with let and const, just pretend everywhere that I have var, it says let. Really, it should be let. And if this were code I were writing that was like going to be maintainable and reliable and stay around for a while, it would definitely be using let and const. So the other sort of reason why var is kind of nice is there are some, I'm trying to remember the exact situation, but there are circumstances when you're in the JavaScript console, when if you use var over using let, it actually allows you to like change the variable in a certain way. I'm being really vague because I forget what exactly the situation is, and maybe I'll look into it afterwards and remember what that is. But there is sometimes a benefit to using var in the JavaScript console, even though it is technically deprecated. Yeah, good question. So I just wanted to highlight again here that the .then here is a really important thing to wrap your head around. That what you have inside of this .then, this function is going to be called when the Axios request, when the HTTP request Axios kicks off completes. And note that response is defined here. So if you tried to put this here, down here, that's not going to work. That's not going to work because response is defined here. Response is defined inside this function. And it's not defined outside of the function. So therefore, it's not going to work. I'm trying to emphasize that because that's a mistake I see a lot of people make. Okay.
Ryan.
Yes.
Hey, there's a different question in the chat. Shah asked, does this work in most browsers?
Great question. It depends on what you mean by most. I'm I'm gonna answer yes. For any browser that you're probably likely to encounter as a student, it's gonna be fine. Where you start to run into some problems is when you are trying to support things that have to work in legacy browsers. Yeah, it's gonna work both in Safari and Firefox. Yeah, latest versions of both of those, it's fine. Really, what's going to be the bane of most most web developers' existence, especially on the front end, is good old Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer always has a slightly special flavor of things. I actually don't know if it has fetch built in. The reason, so some browser history, Internet Explorer, the latest version of Internet Explorer is Internet Explorer 11, and then Microsoft released Edge. And Edge is actually based on the same runtime as Google Chrome. So behind the scenes, it's using a similar technology stack, which means it's a lot more modern. The problem is there's still some enterprises out there that insist on everyone using IE 11 for everything. And if you're unlucky enough to work for a company that makes enterprise software and has to support IE 11, you're going to be in for a fun time when you realize it is getting retired in 2022, and we are counting down the days at work. Yeah, it is it's going to be a nice day when that happens. But the sort of little bit of the bittersweet part about it is everyone's standardizing on Google Chrome as like or Chromium as the thing that powers their web browser, is a little bit concerning because Google's going to have an immense amount of power over the web at that point. Because the only two web rendering engines that are going to be out there are going to be Mozilla's Gecko and Chrome's Blink. And I guess WebKit too, but WebKit's what Safari uses is kind of based on the same lineage as Google Chrome's. So really, there's going to be two out there, and Mozilla right now is not looking all that great. Like they're like having some serious financial problems right now. So it's going to be interesting in like the next 5 years if Google's just going to kind of take over the web. I mean, more than they already have. Like, you're not going to be able to access the web without using a Google product. It's going to be a bit of an interesting situation. Anyway, that's off topic, but hopefully you got something out of that craziness. Yeah.
Can I add one quick thing?
Yep.
One quick thing before we continue, since we're off topic here. I did check, and in the official Mozilla docs for Fetch, it is not supported by Internet Explorer.
Of course.
Still a bunch of no's.
Now, here's a good thing, though. There are other ways in Internet Explorer you can make HTTP requests in the browser. So what people have done is they've written these things called polyfills. This is a word you'll hear thrown around. And it's basically a version of Fetch that someone wrote that uses the special Internet Explorer way to make a request, but basically provides you the same sort of interface. So you can type Fetch and you can use that, or you could use Axios because Axios uses Fetch behind the scenes. You could use all these libraries, and there's just like a compatibility layer there that someone else wrote. So it's not to say you can't make requests from a web page in Internet Explorer. You definitely can. It's just that they don't support the latest and greatest ways to do it. Yeah, Carolyn, it is going away. It's just it's not gone away yet.
So can I ask you a question? Because earlier you said that Fetch was used was built into like most modern browsers, and now you're saying that Fetch is used behind the scenes in Axios. So basically, it's just better to use Axios then?
It can be. It depends a lot on what you're trying to do. Now, Axios is better in that it has more features. However, more features means that the probability of things breaking is higher. So like if more features means there's kind of more you have to think about, more you have to worry about. It's a more complex tool. So sometimes using the simpler tool like Fetch it makes more sense. And in my unfettered opinion, which Joey would disagree with me here, I think that I'm not a really big fan of Axios. Like I think Fetch is probably good enough for like 95% of use cases, and it's probably what I would reach for. but Axios is the same sort of tool, but just with extra utilities included. And in the case of the app Joey's going to be building with you, he's taking advantage of some of those extra utilities to make it a little bit easier to write the code. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, I already did my speech on how you need to put your console.log inside the .then. Now, there are other things in this response. And just educationally, let me just log out this whole thing, not just .status. Oh. You can see there's a lot of information in here. There is all the response headers. These should look kind of familiar. A bunch of information about the request. So like, actually, there's not really anything good in there. The status code, data contains the response body. Config contains a bunch of, I don't know, a bunch of stuff. But in effect, like this object it gives you, this response value here, contains all the information that you would have gotten had you made the request with Netcat or had you made it with Postman. It's the same information, just provided to you in a different way. In a way that's a lot more machine parsable by JavaScript. Since it's an object, you can access like the status if you want on it. You get it as a number that you can do math with, or you can check to see if it's equal to 200 and do something, or you can kind of tie it into your application very nicely. Okay, I just kind of did the demo, but I'm going to add a little bit more to the demo. So one thing I briefly touched on yesterday is if you make a request on a web page, it's going to show up over here in the network pane. I talked about this network pane yesterday. And this thing is going to become your best friend, with especially today as you're debugging these sorts of problems. Because what you're going to find is every single time you make a request, we'll go over here, you'll get a row in here. And this will allow you to take a look at the exact information you're sending. So you'll see like the URL, the method, the response headers, the request headers. You can take a look at the body you get back, all this stuff. And I find that when I'm working on web applications and I'm making requests, this is the primary interface by which I troubleshoot requests when they go wrong. I find the request I'm looking for. I go through all these tabs, I look at the data that's in here, and this is able to tell me most of what I need to know to figure out what's going wrong. In addition, a bit more advanced, but good to know that it exists, is if you make multiple requests, it will, well, let me make 2 in a row here. So that. It will sort of show you this waterfall thing here, which will tell you how long each part of the request takes, and it'll tell you like in general how long the request takes. So maybe you've got a request that's super slow. You can start to look at this and see like how long the request took to like download all the information from the server, how long the whole request took. You can start to see like a timeline of all these things as you yeah. So like you can see a bunch of events happen here, like this is kind of, this side thing is like a broken down version of this thing across the top. And again, not something you're going to use today, but just knowing that the tools support you to be able to do this sort of debugging, like being able to profile how long different requests take, is kind of a good thing to know about. Okay. So DevTools is going to be your best friend, network pane in particular. But all 3 of these things, they do the same thing. All 3 tools do the exact same thing. The only real difference is what sort of environment they run in. And in particular, this example, I've got all 3 of these requests with the same data. So if you want to kind of compare and see what data looks like in Postman and how that relates to like an Axios request, this is a great slide to do all that comparison. Yeah. So that's most of my my instruction for today. And the rest of pretty much our class today is going to be trying to do some exercises, making requests with Axios, and probably a lot of trial and error. But You're going to learn so much, and it's going to be worth it. So just stick with it. So the exercises for today are the Axios exercises. And these endpoints are going to look pretty similar. At this point, you've hit a lot of these endpoints already, many times. And I found actually at another endpoint I forgot about. So we got that one, a new one for exercise 1, and a slightly bit more creative thing for exercise 4. And then I've got a little bit of a weekend project for you to do over the weekend, but we'll talk about that later in the class. So I'm going to put this here into the Slack channel, and you can walk through and try all these exercises with Axios. Just like I did here, I'm going to suggest you do them in the JavaScript console, and it's really important that you go to module5.ml and do them on that page. Don't do it on another page. Do it on the module5.ml page. And as for why you have to do it that way, that is a topic of a lesson in 2 class days. So we're going to talk about that. Okay. Let me put that there. What are people thinking about all this? I know you haven't written any of these yet, but yeah, Caroline, I did modify the exercises slightly from the did I modify exercise 4 from the curl assignment? Yeah, I modified the exercises slightly with this new assignment. I just wanted to make them a little bit more interesting and not the same thing over and over and over.
Right,
But
I'm sorry, I meant for the assignment we've been working on that a lot of people have handed in already from yesterday's class. That the 4th one, I thought I heard you say you made some changes to that one as well.
no,
Not these current ones isn't what I'm talking about. So that's as it is in what I have.
yeah, I haven't touched the assignment from yesterday at all. That's
Oh, okay. And then do we have the URL or the GitHub location for the today's exercises you're about to go to? Okay, we're good. Thank
put them
you.
in Slack. Yep. So I'm kind of hoping that seeing this is starting to put into perspective why HTTP requests are important on the web. Does hopefully today answer a little bit of the why around that? Cool. Well, I think I'm gonna let you folks get into these exercises and play around. Remember, go to module5.ml in a web browser, open up DevTools, and then start going at it. Kelly and I are around for help if you need it. Feel free to speak up, and yeah, have fun.
Brian, I had already loaded this page earlier, your module page, but it says not secure before the URL. Is that okay?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, that's totally fine.
Oh, okay.
Just so you know, the reason why it says that is because I didn't host this website on HTTPS. I only used HTTP. 2 reasons, partially because I'm a little lazy and didn't want to figure that out. But the other reason is I didn't want to add more sort of thing. I didn't want to have to talk about it in this class. In practice, if you're making a request to an HTTPS site, you just swap HTTP for HTTPS and you're good. But it's going to make it a little bit easier if we don't have to worry about that. For this.
Okay, great. And I didn't mean to make you have to explain. I wanted to be sure it was okay for me to proceed. Like,
yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Totally fine. Okay, folks, you've gotten a little bit of time to play around with the Axios exercises. How's it been going? Success? Not so much? Just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a yes or no or something like that in chat. Yep, these are definitely the most challenging ones we've had to do so far, I think. I think it might be worthwhile if we go through one of them together. Sounds good? Cool. Okay. Let's do this first one. Then make a request to this endpoint to return some text. So let's go back over here to the example. I'm just going to copy this example and start with it. I'm going to change to let because that bugs you folks. Okay, so what are the parts of the request here? Where are we? There we go. Okay. So we've got the URL, we've got the optional body, and then we've got headers and other metadata information. So first, let's start with the URL. So remember, what parts are in the URL? You have the protocol, you have the domain, and then you have the path. So we've got our path here, and we know the domain. The domain, it says, is module5.ml. We know the protocol, it's HTTP, it's the protocol we're using. So we have all the pieces we need to put together a URL. So we want something like that. So protocol, HTTP, module5.ml, that's our domain, /apples, that's our path. Okay. So it says we need to use the method of get. If you remember here, this is where the method goes. Method. Already got get here, so we're good. Oh, wait, this one. And then finally, we have no headers. So if we have no headers, we can do one of two things. We can either leave that object blank, or we can just omit it. And also notice it didn't say anything about the body, but if you remember, GET requests normally don't have bodies. So if you remember how I mentioned there are some default values here. If you leave the body empty, it defaults to an empty string. If you leave the options empty, it defaults to this or no headers. So I'm just going to leave these two parameters off. I mean, I could include like empty string and then like headers with nothing, but I'm just going to leave them off. We don't need them. They're just they're superfluous. So that seems like that's probably what we need for the first line. And the second line here, I'm just gonna leave that as it is in the example. I'm not gonna touch it for now. Just kind of for this first bit, focusing on just the Axios bit up here, just the request itself. We hit enter. 200. Remember from status codes, 200 to 2 means things went good. Not a 4, not a 5. Doesn't start with a 4, doesn't start with a 5. So we've made a request. Now, you probably want to see the body, right? Like that's kind of usually what these endpoints are about. Like there's information in the body you want to look at. If you remember, there was a slide here where I talked about how you could get the body. Yeah, response body, response.data. So I'm going to change. Oh yeah, great point. I have not been utilizing that pasted code channel, and I probably should have been. So there's the body example. And then here's the example to get the status. Okay. So I'm gonna do what it says here. Dot data. I'm gonna update my code to match this code. I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna hit up. Go to status. I'm gonna go data. Hit enter. There we go. We got some text. Now, one thing I realized I didn't cover, and you maybe have not talked about this yet in the JavaScript console, is if you want to have multiple lines in here, like you notice how I've got this first line here, and then I've got an enter, and then like lines here. How did I do that? Like if you just type like a line, console.log, and then hit enter, it's going to run it. It's not going to let you actually have a new line. The way you do that is you hit shift enter, and that allows you to put a new line in there if you want to, and you can type whatever you want on a further line. And then once you've done that, then you can hit enter at the very end and run it. So that's kind of a trick for this environment you should know about. Alternatively, you can just run these line by line. So you can just go that, and then that separately, and that works fine too. Is that helpful? Did that make sense to folks?
I'm sorry, Ryan, I'm a little confused. Were we supposed to be like writing this code in different ways like you showed? You did a whole, like, I mean, I did example 1 and, you know, got the return that there's a promise pending. I was supposed to do more than that?
Yeah, so you've
don't.
Yes, so in order to get the data out of the request, you've gotten the promise. But typically when you make a request to a server, the data that you get back in the response is an important thing you want to inspect. Now, as the reason why I paused a little bit there is I don't think actually as written in the exercise, it says you should analyze the response of each thing. And maybe that's just, I wrote that a bit poorly.
Yeah, I'm lost.
Okay, let me go through this one more time then. So let's start from just the first line.
Okay.
I'm going to copy this over here.
Mm-hmm.
I think this made sense to most folks.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to run this, and I'm just going to store the output into a variable. I'm going to call it promise. It doesn't really matter.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this I imagine is relatively straightforward. You've got this value promise here, and you can take a look at that if you want. And you're going to see like stuff here, but you can see that it is a promise. Like that's the kind of thing it is.
Okay, that's.
Now, a promise, if you remember from yesterday, is sort of like it's a container. It can hold a value or it can be empty. So one example of maybe how that would work is, let's say maybe I had like, where am I there? Oh, weird. Okay, I had something like container. I'm gonna set container equal to null.
Yeah, I remember that a little. Yep.
Now I'm gonna write a function. Function fill container. And then I'm going to say like it's going to set container equal to 5. And then at any point I want, I can check container. Container is going to be null, and that's not going to change until I call fill container.
Yeah, you got to run the call the function. Yep.
And now container is 5. What's going on here is very similar to that. Imagine that container is promise, and when Axios completes its request, it sets the value of container equal to a value. In this case, it has a bunch of like status information about the response. It has like the response body, it has the response headers, all that sort of stuff. Now the trick is, and what makes promises a little bit hard to wrap your head around, is the value the thing itself, the promise itself, contains this, but is not directly equal to it. The promise inside of the promise somewhere is this value.
Mhm. That's the actual promise
But you don't,
inside the
yeah, I mean,
promise, like a gift that you opened.
you don't access, like, you can't just like do promise dot, like whatever you want, like promise dot status. That's not how it works. You have to actually like unwrap the
You have
promise,
to-
or like
you have
get
to
the
open
thing
it.
inside of it. Yeah, you have to open it up.
Yep, got it.
And the way you open it up is using this dot then thing. So when you attach the dot then to a promise, you can give it a callback function. And this callback function, as a parameter, is called with the thing inside of the promise, with that value. So what this means is, if I do something like console.log value, what this is going to do is it's going to give me that value that is inside of the promise, the 5 in this container example. It's going to print that out for me. It just turns out that that value that it puts into there is data about the response that came back from the request.
Right. But you do have to call that function then.
You do. You can't, there's no way to get at the data inside of the promise without using .then. And the
So-
reason, oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right, so the function is promise.then, but the parameters of it are actually a function. Also,
Yes, so the parameter of to.then is a callback function. If
right,
you're-
okay, I gotta review that stuff because but okay, so far so good, right? Got it.
Yeah, I mean, in effect, you can think about it like once the value inside of the container, once that value inside of the promise gets set, it's going to call this function immediately. So what that means is when the response comes back from the request and the internal promise infrastructure, or Axios, it sets that into the container, it puts that response data inside of the container. At that point, it's going to call this function here. And it's going to say, there's a value that's been placed inside the container. Here's that value.
And then it prints out on the user screen.
Yeah.
Man, that's so cool. So for these exercises, we'll be going to that level then.
Yeah, I would say if you can figure out this line, well, I'd say, okay, at a
The first
minimum,
one's easy.
at a minimum, figure this part out. And if you can run that and you get a pending promise,
Yes,
that's great.
and I did.
Preferably, I'd like you to put that into a variable called promise.
Okay.
And then to get the value out, extract the value inside of the promise out with the .then and print it out. Because then you can peek in here and you can see what was the status code, what was
Yes.
the data you got back. The most important thing though is, and what I'm really trying to get at with this lesson is understanding how to put together these Axios calls. The promise stuff, you're going to get it over time. If you get it now, great, do it, make use of it. If you don't, focus on this.
It'll come to.
And if you want to get the information about the request, that's kind of where the network pane comes in, which is kind of cool. Like if you
A network pane, is that what you said?
yeah, if you make a call like this and you go over to the network pane, you can see I've made all these calls.
Yep.
Yeah, like they call it a pane.
Yeah.
They call it a pane, really just a tab across the top of the screen.
Like a window pane. I thought you said network ping, like you do something to fire the network to do something. Okay. Anyway,
Okay.
whatever.
And you can get all the information you need from in here if you really have to. I would say though, the way you're going to be interacting with this via code is going to be with unwrapping the promise with .then, because it's going to give you the information you need to do things with the data. So you need to eventually be able to get to this point, but if all you can figure out today is this, that's good enough to start with.
And the first part was easy, and then I saw you going through it. I'm like, whoa, I
Yeah.
know he showed us this stuff, but I didn't realize we were supposed to do it. Okay,
Yeah.
and these are class exercises, but they will become homework, so I can play with it some more and look at the slides some more. And
Definitely.
okay, so, all right, great. Thank you so much for taking all that time. Thank you,
Oh.
everybody, for your patience. I appreciate it.
I think more the people than just you wanted that help.
Okay, I didn't want to take up too much class time, but I thought it might help others too. So,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
In general, can folks put just like a yes or a no as how just the Axios, like constructing these Axios function calls have been going? Has that been going well?
Also wanted to chime
Okay.
in as the break keeper and say it's like 6:45. So if we want to think about taking a break sometime soon.
Yeah, that's a very good call. Okay, I see a lot of yeses. That's encouraging. Cool. And I would, how many people are having difficulty with promises? Oh, sorry, Susan. I should have made that more clear. Okay, so they're still having a lot of difficulty with promises. Okay, let's we do this. Latonia, let me answer your question, then let's go on a break for 15 minutes. We're almost at the 45 here, or we're just at past the 45 here. So we'll have 15 minutes and we can come back at 7. Latonia, you asked, where does the body go in? The body is a value, is a field available on this value variable here. So if you take a look inside of this thing, there's a data, which is where the body that gets returned back from the server is located. So if you wanted to print out the body, you'd do something like, well, let me make the request one more time here. Oh, data, not body. You do something like that. If you want to print out the status, and these are really the two things that are most important. Do something kind of like that. Or what I was just doing is printing out the whole value, just because it gives you all the information. You can just look through it, and it just gives you it all in one place. So I found that to be kind of nicer when playing around in the console. Okay, I think we're at a good time here, a good point for a break. So let's take a 15-minute break. If folks have questions, feel free to post them in Slack. I haven't been really paying attention, but I'll try to catch up during the break, and we'll get back to this in 15 minutes.
Hey, I just finished the weekend homework, and every time I reload the page, they come back in a different order depending on what resolves first. That's cool.
Yeah.
So if you wanted them to come back in a certain order, would you put those set timeouts in there?
If you want them to come back in a certain order, probably the most reliable way to do it would be to make a request inside of the .then of the request you wanted to happen before it. So like make one request, do like promise.then, and then inside of the promise.then, you'd make the second request.
Oh, okay. I was just curious. I mean, it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. It's kind of cool that they came back in a different order because it showed me how it was working. So
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe I'll try that, like just to see if I can get it to work. Also, actually, I do have one more question though. So the first, when I got to the second one, I called it promise, and then the second one I put let promise again, and it gave me an error for that for some reason. And I was curious. I mean, I did promise 2, promise 3, promise 4, but I was curious why I did that, because if you do a let, then when you assign it something else, can it just replace it? Or
This is the thing that I was thinking you can do with var. So
okay.
thank you for just mentioning that. If you do let, wait a second, let a is equal to 1. And then you
Okay.
run let a is equal to 2.
Mhm.
Wait, no, that does work. Oh, maybe this isn't what I'm thinking. I thought you could do.
But I'm not in the console. I'm in VS Code with a HTML file. This is for the homework, for the weekend homework.
Yeah. Maybe I have this. Okay, never mind. Maybe I got this backwards. Yeah, the reason why that doesn't work though is because if you do let, it's going to define a new variable, and if you want to reassign that variable, you just need to do like.
Oh, that's right. Right. So I just should leave the lets out of the rest of it.
Yeah, now you have to put let for the first one because you need to tell it needs to create.
Right, but the rest of them, I don't know why I didn't think of that. I was copying the example. That's why.
Yeah. Well, the other way to do it is just make a new variable name each time.
Right.
Mel, I took a look at your code. It looks like it's correct. At least I ran it and it seemed to work for me. What are you encountering? Syntax error. Can you put a screenshot in the channel or indicate what you're seeing? At least for me. I've got multiple computers up here, but when I ran it on my other computer, oh, here's why. If you reload the page, it's gonna work. Then we run it again, it is gonna work. Weird. Okay, it's the reason. What's going on is something with the var. You're trying to define a variable again. You've already defined. You've defined promise already once in this environment. You're trying to define it again, and it's not working. So I'd say reload your page, put that same code in again, hit enter, and I bet it's going to work.
Ryan,
Yeah.
in the browser, DevTool console thing with Axios, can you open multiple consoles?
Multiple consoles at the same time?
Yeah, or would you have to open separate browser windows to do that?
You've got to open separate tabs, unfortunately.
Okay, because I wanted to get to a certain point, I'm going to figure it out and then, work on the next one and the next one. All right.
Yeah.
Because I was working on that first one, the Apples one, and I got the promise pending. So I typed in promise. Is that what I was supposed to do?
Yes, you got something like
Uppercase P for promise?
yes. Here, let me actually, before I say that, Susan, the shortcut you're looking for, you're talking about like if you have stuff on the page and you want to get rid of it.
No, like I just want to go down a line, but without hitting enter.
Oh, you mean line break?
Line break. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I've had trouble with that in the chat because
Oh,
yeah,
shift
it's like in the chat, it's control return on
Shift
the
enter.
Mac.
Thank you. That's what I'm looking
Yeah.
for. Yeah. Thank you.
That
Yeah.
actually also works in Slack, and I bet also works in Zoom too. Oh, no, it doesn't. It doesn't work in Zoom.
Sorry, Susan, I didn't mean to jump on your question in the chat. I actually couldn't see the chat for a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I got promise, and then I typed in promise with an uppercase P, and then I got the fancy F in blue.
So you
Promise. Yeah.
You got something like this, right?
Except it doesn't say fulfilled. It's like there's a little F in the beginning, and then promise with the parameter parentheses function kind of thing, and then the curly braces with native code put in the middle with square brackets.
Oh, you have something like this.
Not like it, exactly.
Yeah, okay. So look at the difference between this and this.
No
And it
lowercase, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, what might be helpful if you're running into that is make this some other variable, like call it like response.
So what was happening there then? The initial response, because it was uppercase, it thought it was talking to itself or something?
No, so the name of this variable is promise, lowercase p promise, but built into the browser, there is a thing, uppercase p promise, that is part of the promise library, the way you use promises.
Right.
Just like set timeout is like a thing built into the browser. like
Exactly. So if
Window.
I wrote that, it would be like, huh? Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So lowercase will take me to the next step. Okay, there's a lot of pieces missing here. Okay.
Either that or just pick something else that's not promise. That might have, in hindsight, that might have not have been a great variable name to use for you folks.
Well, it's just trying to see how this all fits together and like what it is and why it is what will make it make more sense, you know, because I'm getting more inside this than I've ever had before. I understood this stuff sort of just as a user and as a cataloger and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's the pieces that, you know, it's like, well, oh, that has to be that way because this happens over here. And then it falls together. But there's like pieces missing when I go to do it, things that I either didn't hear you say or, you know, so, okay, enough. I'm done being a pain in the butt. Thank you.
No problem. I don't know if anyone was following the chat Susan and I were having in the Pasted Code channel, but she pointed out some pretty good points that if you're having difficulty with this stuff, it might be worth reading through that. The gist is, when I was talking about like this code here, I was talking about it kind of as one block of code, and then I kind of switched to running it line by line and didn't make that explicit that I was doing that. And there's no reason why you can't run this, like you can't run this as, There's no reason you can't run this line. Then hit enter, inspect promise, play around with it, log it out, do whatever you want to do, and then run this as a separate line afterwards. And that might be easier for you.
And again, that would be with a soft return, not a hard return.
Yes.
So it's not really a different line per se. It's just,
Sorry. No, I misspoke there. If you can do this in two ways. You can either paste this, hit return, not shift return, hit return, then copy this or write this, paste this. That's one way to do it. So you're running them as two separate statements.
right. So that's a hard return.
That's a hard return. Or the other option is you could copy this whole thing or write this whole thing as one bit of code where like you're doing like shift return in between and you're writing it as one long thing and then hit enter and then run it. And that would work too.
Yeah, and you don't have to do any shift return because it's built into the sample that you're copying. Yeah, copying and pasting is becoming my best friend because my hands have been bothering me. So that's a good, but I better make sure when I'm copying and pasting, I don't have other mistakes I put in there. So, all
Yeah,
right.
even if you're not copying and pasting, which I would suggest you don't just blindly copy and paste stuff. You
No,
try
I
to
can't-
at least
no.
understand what you're doing.
Oh, exactly. But I mean, to save the time in the typing once you understand it, because I'm having
Yeah.
some discomfort in my left hand. So,
But even if you're not copying and pasting, you can still write it all out as one block. And this is actually kind of nice because you can just paste like code you write in VS Code too. If you want to open up a new tab, write your code in there, copy it, come over to here, paste it, and hit enter. That's another approach.
yeah, I was using a text file to type this stuff out while looking at the slides and stuff, and then copying and pasting that into, because what I ran into with the terminal yesterday was I was just having typing issues, and it was just getting more and more frustrating. It's like if I get it the way I want it on a piece of paper, so to speak, and plug it in, then it's a lot easier for me. So at least it is at my age now. All right, thank you.
How are folks doing it? What exercise are they on at this point? Okay, well, let's explore on exercise 3. Cool. Nice. So I'm curious, how many of you who just posted a number were able to log out what you got with the .then and take a look at the response, not just in DevTools, but actually in the JavaScript console? Cool. Well, I've got really 2 more things I want to talk about today that are just sort of shorter sort of housekeeping items. I'm gonna go through them, I think, right now, just kind of while we're all here, and pretty much the rest of the class, I think, is just going to be more question and answer. If you want me to go through anything, we can do that. First thing, we're supposed to do office hours, and the weekend's coming up here. When do people like to do those? I know the one that I went to with Max, I think, was like at 11 a.m. I can pretty much make any time work on my end. In addition, I actually live in the same building as Common Space Work. So if anyone wants to actually come in person and do something in person, I'm more than willing to do that too. I've got the whole Common Space Work area downstairs. So I don't know how comfortable folks are with that, but I can definitely support that. Okay, usually Saturday at 11 a.m. So if that's what folks are good with, I'll plan on that. I'm not exactly sure. I guess I just have to, this the same meeting we go into at that point and nothing else. I'm pretty unfamiliar with the whole way this is all laid out, but I guess I can talk with Jesse and figure it out. Cool. Well, then we'll plan on Saturday at 11 a.m. And if anyone has interest in coming to Common Space Work or wants to work with me directly, I don't know the rule at Common Space Work. I'll say I probably will be wearing a mask if there's anyone who wants to do anything in person, but maybe talk with the folks at Common Space Work. Oh, you're there now. Nice. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the weekend project, and some folks kind of already continued on to that. I've got a sort of project I laid out for you folks to do this weekend. It's relatively, I think, a straightforward extension of what we did today. Kind of a mix of what we did today and what you did in the previous module with writing JavaScript in HTML files and script tags. So really, this weekend project is going to be the first time you're going to be using an HTTP request to actually do something kind of interesting and exciting. You're going to be making a web page that is actually dynamic, where the content depends on data you get from a server. And I'm hoping this will kind of start to bring it together and show you kind of the power of HTTP and making requests dynamically in JavaScript. Once we've still got this final project for this module, which is the New York Times exercise that I showed at the very beginning, and I'm still planning for us to do that. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to post the information about that this weekend, and if anyone is able to finish the weekend project wants to start on that, they're welcome to. It sounds like some folks are already working on the weekend project and might finish it up here soon, but if you're not, that's more just I want to give people who are a bit ahead a chance to start to look ahead a bit. But that's going to be something we're going to talk about next week. So, sounds good? Cool. I believe I have. Yes, this one. So for context, for anyone who's going to be taking a look at the New York Times exercise, what's different about this is we're not going to be talking with the module 5.ml server anymore. We're going to be actually talking with a real service that provides real data. And the best sort of basic beginner service I could find was the New York Times API. Now, there's some things you're going to be confused about with it. In particular, the data it's going to give you back is not going to make sense yet, but we're going to be talking about that next week. I just want to give you a chance to start looking it over, maybe starting to read the documentation for the API. So it tells you like the method you need to use, the path you need to use, the URL. You need to give it some special header. It'll tell you about all that. So yeah, but keep in mind there's still some stuff you're not going to know yet. one thing I'll throw out there, if any of you folks do want to come in person, send me a message ahead of time just so I know, because if no one's going to show up, I'm probably not going to head down to common space work. But if people are going to show up, we'll head down there. related to that Kelly comment Kelly just made, those DigitalOcean tutorials are really, really good. Like, I don't know who they hire to make those, but they're always outstanding. Like, no matter the topic. Since the DigitalOcean thing talks about it, I'm going to bring up, there's another thing we didn't talk about with promises, which is that a promise may not actually get fulfilled. It may not have a thing put into the container. There's a possibility that a promise will throw an error, will fail. And that's what's called rejecting a promise. And that's that will happen when typically when a like an HTTP request will fail, the promise will reject. I didn't talk about that because it's adds just more complexity, and you guys already are up to your nose in complexity right now. But know that like that is a thing that like it is possible for a promise to not resolve. That's what they call the .then concept of resolving promise. So a promise will either eventually resolve or it'll reject.
So I just wanted to take a quick second and also reiterate something that Ryan had mentioned earlier, which is that promises are difficult. They are hard to conceptualize, and you're not a bad developer if you looked at the promise the first time and did not immediately understand it. That's okay. I didn't understand them either when I did this cohort. It takes a while to get it. So don't feel like you're doing a bad job in class or like you're a bad developer or that you shouldn't be doing this. I mean, that's what I thought sometimes going through cohort 1. So I just wanted to mention it for people out there. Like, you are a good developer. This takes time to learn. It takes time to get it down. So feel free to like give yourself a break when you need it. You know, if you're feeling stressed out, walk away from it for a while and come back to it. That's a healthy thing to do. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad developer if you don't immediately understand everything. These things do take a lot of time. So keep at it.
I would go as far to say that I don't think anyone understands promises the first time I see them. I know I definitely didn't. It took me like three or four encounters before I started to kind of understand what was going on.
Yeah, and Ryan's like wicked smart. So if it took him like 3 to 4 times to get promises, like, you're doing just fine. It takes you a while to get it.
Latonia, to answer your question, what was done to get a better handle on them? At least for me, what I did is I just used them. Like, the only way you're going to get better at them is if you write code that uses them over and over. And what's really good is that in the next module, the React module, you're going to be using these all the time. So you're going to get a lot of practice. And like, understanding how promises actually work under the hood, I think is educational once you get to the point where like you're comfortable as a user of them. Like, it really reinforces and explains what's going on. And for me, it was really a clarifying experience. But that's not like, that's something you should do once you kind of are understanding how they work from like the user perspective. Brielle, you said you're getting 4.1 unauthorized for the lockbox for the weekend project?
Yes. I'm assuming it's something I did, but I just wanted to double check. I've tried a couple of different ways, but.
Okay. Would you be able to either paste your code in the paste code channel, or we can share your screen or something? Just want to take a peek at what you got.
I can't share my screen, but I'll paste the code in the pasted code channel.
Okay. Related to what Kelly said with repetition and developing a consistent coding practice, like definitely, I would say that once you're done with careers in code, I would make it a point to just like have a list of interesting projects you think would be cool to work on, and just try to tackle like take like a week and try to just do as much of one of those as you can. I think one of the best ways you can grow as a developer, especially a web developer, is just to build lots of things and just give yourself exposure to these things over and over. And the other kind of nice side effect of that is if you go through that process of like spend a week, try to make a thing, figure out what was successful, what was not, and then try it again with the next thing. You're going to end up with a bunch of portfolio pieces you can add to your kind of your resume and things you've worked on. And I mean, like it'll every job I've gotten professionally as a developer has started with people looking at my work, and that's kind of been one of the big reasons why I kind of left it above the crowd, I guess. So having a portfolio work that shows you know what you're doing is always going to be helpful for an employer. Tony asked, what platforms do you use for your portfolio? I've tried a number of different things over the years. I would say that probably the most important thing is just to have repositories on GitHub. If you've got that, you don't have like a website or something, that's totally fine. Like that's a place where it's relatively discoverable. If you want to go down the portfolio website route, great for you. Go do that. I've hosted my portfolio website now in Github Pages for like probably almost 10 years, if not longer, and it's worked out pretty well. There are lots of fancier ways to do it these days. Like people talk about like Netlify and other services. There's a couple that I'll use occasionally, but I found GitHub Pages to be pretty reliable and pretty straightforward, especially for beginners. If you don't know about GitHub Pages, basically it's a way you can serve a website out of a GitHub repository. So you enable like you create a repository. Okay, it's not going to tell you how to do it. Well, that's not so great. You create a repository and you flip a setting in the GitHub settings for it, and then you just turn on GitHub Pages, and then it'll give you a URL you can go to access it. So.
I think we have that set up and connected to our own, we bought domain names a while ago, and we connected those to our GitHub. Like our files are in GitHub, that's where they're coming from. For
yeah, okay.
Very basic website. It basically just had like our name and whatever we wanted to put for a subtitle, but we could add to it.
So you're already GitHub Pages experts,
Yeah.
all of you. Okay.
I don't know that we're experts, but
So I did want to clarify one final thing about the weekend project. And that's while logging it out to the console is great, and that's a great place to start. If you're able to get that working, try to append it to the DOM. Make a new DOM element, put it in the DOM, display it. Then you're really starting to get into why this is powerful, because you can request data from the server and render it to the screen. The user can view it. So that's an extra little layer, but make sure you give that a try if you've already completed the rest of it. But with that, we're coming up on 8 here. So if anybody else has any questions you want to go through synchronously, now's a great time. Otherwise, I think we're about ready. We're about done here, I think. So anything else anybody wants to go through?
Oh, just practice.
Great.
I just posted I couldn't really get a whole screenshot, so I just saved it as a log file of what I was working on when you were helping with the exercise 1, just to show you where I'm at and how far I've gotten, in case there's any advice or tips you have. So that's in Slack under the pasted code.
Yep, I took a peek at it. It looks like you're heading in the right direction.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, good night, everybody. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. We'll see you Saturday.
Yeah. So reminder, office hours 11 a.m. on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
So 30-second feedback. I'll post that in Slack.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Kelly. Take care, everybody.
See you, folks. Bye.